Good morning to all. So, in the last class, we discussed regarding the topics the hegemony and interpellation. So, we can define the hegemony as the process through which the dominant groups propagate their beliefs and ideas and rule over the subordinate groups with their consent. And also, we discussed regarding the topic interpellation. So, basically, interpellation means the process of voluntarily assimilating the subordinate groups into the mainstream thinking is known by the name interpellation. And also we have different kind of this definition for the interpellation, in which the interpellation expresses the idea that an idea is not simply yours alone, but rather an idea that has been presented to you for you to accept. So basically interpellation is a kind of process, and a process in which we encounter our culture's values and internalize them. So now we had to focus on the difference between the interpellation and hegemony. So basically the interpellation is associated with the French Marxist philosopher who is Louis Althusser, and regarding the concept of this hegemony, it was usually associated with the Gramsci. So here we have the two different kinds of this concept. The first one is the hegemony, then we have the interpellation. So what is the difference between the hegemony and interpellation? So the hegemony could perhaps be convinced as a state of affairs or the success of the dominant class in making their view of the world, which is the ideology, accepted and internalized by others as their own. So in the process of this hegemony, the dominant class or groups, they propagate their beliefs and also ideas and rule over the subordinate groups. So here the kind of these ideas or these kinds of interest is propagated by the point of view of this ruling class or the dominant class, and regarding the subordinate class, they just accept all these kinds of rules in a such a way that with their consent. So അവരത്ര അത് വില്ലിംഗ് ആയിട്ട് അവരത് ആക്സെപ്റ്റ് ചെയ്യുന്ന അവസ്ഥയാണ് എപ്പോഴും നമുക്ക് ഹെജിമണി എന്നൊരു കോൺസെപ്റ്റിൽ ഇവിടെ കാണാൻ സാധിക്കുന്നത്. സോ ബേസിക്കലി റിഗാർഡിംഗ് ദി ഹെജിമണി, ഇറ്റ് കുഡ് പെർഹാപ്സ് ബി കൺവിൻസ്ഡ് ആസ് എ സ്റ്റേറ്റ് ഓഫ് അഫയേഴ്സ് the success of the dominant class in making their view of the world. Here their views of the world, which means the ideology of the dominant class, in making their view of the world, which means the kind of ideology, accepted and internalized by the others as their own. So this is regarding the concept of this hegemony. So regarding the interpellation, in a very simple manner, it is a process of such internalization or subjectification or a kind of assimilation. So in a very specific manner, we can spot some differences between the hegemony and the interpellation. So the first one is the definition for the hegemony and the interpellation. So regarding the definition for the hegemony, hegemony is the process through which the dominant groups propagate their beliefs and ideas and rule over the subordinate groups with their consent. So this is the definition for the hegemony, whereas for the interpellation, their consent is assured by their participating in this subjugation, and this process of voluntarily assimilating them into the mainstream thinking is known as the interpellation. So here we have to focus on the major differences between the hegemony and interpellation. So basically both these kinds of this concept are based on the power. So regarding the concept of this hegemony, it is associated with the Antonio Gramsci, and also the hegemony could perhaps be conceived as a state of affairs, then the success of the dominant class in making their view of the world accepted, which means their ideology or their interest accepted and internalized by the others as their own. So this is regarding the concept of the hegemony. The most important thing regarding the hegemony is that a kind of power is exerted over the subordinate groups with their consent. So to be specific, the ruling class interest is presented as a kind of common interest. So basically hegemony is the success of the dominant class in making their view of the world accepted and internalized by the others as their own. So this is regarding the concept of this hegemony. So the example for the hegemony is the imperial powers. Now we have the topic the interpellation. So here we have to focus on some important facts regarding the concept of this interpellation. So basically it is associated with the Louis Althusser, and it is a process of internalization or assimilation. So secondly, to say that someone is fully interpellated, he or she has been successfully brought into accepting a certain role or attributes, or he or she accepted the values willingly. So here all these kinds of roles or these kinds of values is accepted by the people by their willingness. So it is very important. So this is not a kind of exerting the kind of this power. So it is accepted according to their willingness. Then regarding the third important point under the concept of this interpellation, it is an idea that has been presented to you for you to accept it, and also not forced to accept that role through violence, but we are encouraged to accept that role, or a kind of voluntarily assimilating all these kinds of role. So basically the interpellation means that we are accepting a certain kinds of roles in the society. So basically നമ്മൾ സൊസൈറ്റിയിൽ ഒരു സ്പെസിഫിക് റോൾ ഏറ്റെടുക്കുമ്പോൾ നമ്മുടേതായ ഇഷ്ടത്തിനെ നമ്മൾ ഏറ്റെടുക്കുന്ന ഒരു അവസ്ഥയാണ് ഇപ്പോഴും ഇന്റർപെലേഷൻ എന്ന കോൺസെപ്റ്റിൽ ഇവിടെ പറയുന്നത്. So regarding the example for the hegemony is that the imperial power, whereas for the example for the interpellation is that accepting some kind of social role. So regarding the example for the interpellation, we are accepting certain kinds of roles or attributes, for example in the family or in the school, and we are accepting all these kinds of role willingly. So here the term encourage is very important, in which we are accepting all these kinds of role according to our need or according to our willingness. So this is a kind of encouraging statement. So regarding the concept of this hegemony, the ruling class interest is presented as a kind of common interest. So regarding the interpellation, it is an idea that has been presented to you for you to accept it. So there is no kind of this exerting the power or imposing the power in the concept of this interpellation. And also both these concepts are linked together, in which the first one is the hegemony, and from that we have the concept of this interpellation, then we have the concept of this ideology. So that's regarding some important differences between the hegemony and the interpellation. So basically the hegemony is the process through which the dominant groups propagate their beliefs and ideas and rule over the subordinate group with their consent, whereas the interpellation is the process of voluntarily assimilating them into the mainstream thinking. And also the interpellation expresses that the idea that an idea is not simply yours alone, but rather an idea that has been presented to you for you to accept it. So basically interpellation is a process of this internalization or assimilation. So now we have to focus on the topic ideologies. So we already discussed regarding this topic of this ideology in the last few classes. So basically ideology refers to the dominant beliefs, ideas and representation which legitimize the existing power relations. So according to Althusser, we have two types of these power relations, in which the first one is the RSA, the repressive state apparatus. Second one is the ideological state apparatus, which is the ISA. So basically the interpellation is related to the concept of this ideology, in which the ideologies play a crucial role first in the constructing our identities and then giving us the particular place in the society. So basically we have to focus on two important factors. The first one is that it plays a crucial role first in constructing our identities in the society and then giving us a particular place in the society, a specific kind of this role in the society. So to say that someone is fully interpellated is to say that he or she has been successfully brought into accepting a certain role or a kind of this attribute, or he or she accepted this kind of values willingly. So basically according to Althusser, he argued that the process of interpellation works best when it is invisible, when individuals accept the cultural notions as though they are obvious or natural. And also to place people in their proper place in society, Althusser argued that the assimilation happens in two important ways. So this is connected to the ideology. So the first one is through the repressive means, the second one is through ideological means. So the first one is that regarding the repressive, which is the RSA. So the first one happens through the force, so which is the RSA. Second one is through the ideas, which is the ISA. Now we have to focus on the differences between the RSA and ISA. So basically the RSA, it functions by a kind of force. Secondly, it functions first by repression, then by ideology, and finally it can be secured by its unified and centralized organization under the leadership of classes in power. So regarding the ISA, it functions by ideology, and secondly it functions first by ideology, then by repression. So thirdly, it can be secured by the ruling ideology, the ideology of the ruling class. The most important thing is that the RSA, it functions by a kind of force. Second one is the regarding the ideology, in which it functions by the ideas or a kind of these ideologies. So that's regarding the concept of this ideology. So we discussed regarding the topics the hegemony and interpellation, the differences between the hegemony and interpellation, and also regarding the ideology and the difference between the RSA and ISA. So now we have to focus on the textbook point of view, in which the definition for the literature that we already discussed regarding that topic, and also the concept of this literary test. So in the textbook from page number 83 onwards, we have this concept of this hegemony, then interpellation, and as well as this ideology. Then after that, we have the concept of this power play by Harold Pinter, in which any ordinary conversation may be perceived as a kind of power play, in which in any conversation we exchange our views, our ideas of the world and our values, and expect our listener to comply with our views. So this is regarding the concept of this power play according to Harold Pinter. And also in writing too, we do this kind of same action, in which the only difference is that the speaker and listener cannot react as immediately as in a conversation or in the dialogue. So regarding the conversation, we get the instant reply, the immediate reply, whereas in the regarding the writing, we get the reply after reading this kind of forms of this content. So basically this is a kind of power play according to Harold Pinter. So basically the ordinary conversation may be perceived as a kind of power play according to Harold Pinter. Now we have the definition for the literature, in which the literature is a written expression of our experience of the world, and also it deals with the man's relationship with his environment, society and his fellow beings, and hence it is not free from the workings of power. And when we learn a text, we have to learn to interact with the writer and his ideology. So this is regarding the definition of the literature, in which is the written expression of our experience of this world. And also regarding the concept of this literary text, the literary text may document how dominant classes abuse power to exercise their monopoly over the less fortunate beings or reinforce the existing power relations. So here we have to focus on the concept of this literary text. So basically, it may document how dominant classes abuse the power to exercise their monopoly over the less fortunate beings or reinforce the existing power relation. So here we have to focus on the use of the power by the dominant class in order to exercise their monopoly over the less fortunate beings or reinforcing the existing power relations. So this is the basis of this literary text. So here we have an extract from the God of Small Things by Arundhati Roy. So basically this is the first classroom activity that we have to focus on. So now we are going to focus on the classroom activity, which is given in the textbook, which page number 84 and 85. So basically we have to read this extract from the God of Small Things, and we have some important questions that we have to focus on from this paragraph. Now we have to focus on the novel The God of Small Things by Arundhati Roy. So basically it is the most famous work by Arundhati Roy, and the story centers around the wealthy landowning Syrian Christian Aib family of Ayamanam, a town in Kerala, India. And most of the plot occurs in 1969, focusing on the 7-year-old twins Esther and Rahel, who live with their mother Ammu, their grandmother Mamachi, their uncle Chaco, and their great aunt Baby Kochama. And in the backstory before 1969, Mamachi was married to Papachi, an imperial entomologist who beat her cruelly. By 1969, Papachi is dead and Mamachi is blind. Behind her house is the Minichara River and her pickle factory, which is Paradise Pickles and Preserves. Baby Kochama is a bitter, jealous old woman who unrequitedly loved an Irish missionary. Chaco went to Oxford and married Margaret Kochama, an English woman. They had a daughter who is Sophie Moll, and then Margaret left Chaco for a man named Joe. And Chaco returned to Ayamanam and took over the pickle factory. Ammu married Baba, trying to escape Ayamanam, but Baba turned out to be an abusive alcoholic. After the twins were born, the two separated and Ammu moved back to Ayamanam. In a wider society of Kerala, the Communist Party is gaining power and threatens to overthrow the landlords like the Ibes. And the Ibes live near an untouchable who is an inferior caste family that includes Velutha, a young man who works for Chaco and is beloved by the twins. The main action centered around Sophie Mol's visit to Ayamanam. Joe dies in an accident, and Chaco invites Margaret Kochama to Ayamanam for the holidays. Esther, Rahel, Ammu, Chaco, and baby Kochama make a trip to the airport, and on the way, their car is trapped by a communist march. The family then goes to see the Sound of Music, and Esther is molested by the orange drink lemon drink man, a vendor at the theater. The next day, Sophie and Margaret arrive, and the family returns to Ayamanam. Esther fears that the orange drink man will come for him, so he and Raphael find a boat and row across the river to the history house, the abandoned home of an Englishman who went native. Then the twins set up a hideout there. Meanwhile, Ammu dreams about Veluta, and that night she and Veluta meet by the river and have a relationship. They continue to meet every night for the next 2 weeks. Finally, Villepapan, who is Veluta's father, comes to Mamachi and confesses his son's relationship with Ammu. Mamachi and baby Kochama lock Ammu in her room, where she screams that the twins are millstones around her neck. The twins decide to run away to the history house, and Sophie Mole comes with them. Their boat tips over as they cross the river, and Sophie Mole drowns. The twins reach shore and, terrified, fall asleep in the history house, unaware that Veluta is there too. Baby Kochama goes to the police, telling Inspector Thomas Matthew that Veluta tried to rape Ammu and kidnap the children. 6 policemen find Veluta and beat him brutally in front of Esther and Rahel. When Matthew finds out that Veluta is innocent, he threatens to charge baby Kochama. Terrified for herself, she convinces Esther to save Ammu by telling the police that Veluta killed Sophie Mole. Veluta dies in jail that night. After Sophie Mole's funeral, baby Kochama convinces Chaco to throw Ammu out of the house, and Ammu is then forced to return Esther to Baba. And the twins are separated for 23 years, during which Esther stops speaking altogether. When he is 31, Baba re-returns him to Ayamanam. Meanwhile, Rahel is kicked out of many schools, and Ammu dies when Rahel is 11. Rahel marries an American and lives in Boston, but then gets divorced and returns to Ayamanam when she hears Esther is there. The twins are reunited in 1993. Mamachi has died, and baby Kochama and the cook, who is Kochumaria, spend all the day watching TV as the house falls apart. The history house has become a 5-star hotel. Rahel and Esther, who still doesn't speak, sift through some old trinkets and notebooks and end up reaffirming their closeness by having relationship. So that's regarding a quick overview of this novel, which is The God of Small Things by Arundhati Roy. Now we have the classroom activity, in which an extract from this novel, and we have to read that extract, and we have some important questions that we have to answer. So in the textbook, page number 84 onwards, we have this extract from The God of Small Things. So this is the first classroom activity that we have to focus on. So as a young boy, Veluta would come with Villepapan to the back entrance of the Ayamanam house to deliver the coconuts they had plucked from the trees in the compound. Papachi would not allow the Paravans into the house. Nobody would. They were not allowed to touch anything that the touchables touched. Caste Hindus and caste Christians. Mamachi told Esther and Rahel that she could remember a time in her girlhood when Paravans were expected to crawl backwards with a broom, sweeping away their footprints so that the Brahmins or Syrian Christians would not defile themselves by accidentally stepping into a Paravan's footprint. In Mamachi's time, Paravans, like other untouchables, were not allowed to walk on public roads, not allowed to cover their upper bodies, not allowed to carry the umbrellas. They had to put their hands over their mouths when they spoke to divert their polluted breath away from those whom they addressed. So this is the extract that we have to focus on. So based on this extract, we have to focus on 2 important questions. So the first one is that in the above passage, how do you think Arundhati Roy documents The discrimination against and ostracism of the lower caste perpetrated in the social history of Kerala. So basically we have to answer this question in such a way that the discrimination against and also the ostracism of the lower caste in the social history of Kerala. So basically we have some important points that we have to focus on. So the first one is that in the passage, Arundhati Roy has documented many horrible customs, and the Paravans were not allowed to come to the main entrance. They could come only through the back entrance. So this is the first point that we have to focus on. So the Paravans were not allowed to come through the main entrance. They could come only through the back entrance. Secondly, Papaji would not allow the Paravans into the house. And thirdly, Paravans were expected to crawl backwards with a broom, sweeping away their footprints so that the upper caste would not defile themselves by stepping into the footprints of a Paravan. So basically this is the kind of custom implemented during that time. And Paravans were not allowed to walk along public roads. So this is also a kind of important factor regarding this concept. And also they were forbidden to cover their upper bodies. They were not allowed to carry the umbrellas. And finally, they had to put their hands on their mouths when they spoke to avoid their polluted breath away from those to whom they spoke. So these are some important points that we have to focus on while answering this question. So basically all these kinds of concepts are present in this test itself. So we have to focus on this test in order to get a clear idea regarding how to answer this question. So here we have 7 important points that we have to focus on while answering this question. So that's regarding the first question. Secondly, how does Arundhati Roy sensitize, which means make aware, the readers to the social injustice committed against the Paravans by telling them how the Paravans suffered because the inhuman system of untouchability. So the kind of this inhuman system of untouchability is present in this novel. So we have to focus on that kind of perspective. So we can answer this question by only focusing on the major point in which the social injustice committed against the Paravans. So basically, Arundhati Roy sensitized the readers to the social injustice committed against the Paravans by telling them how much they suffered because of the inhuman system of untouchability. So this is regarding the second question. So basically, we have 2 important questions that we had to answer based on this classroom activity. And the third question is for you. So basically this question is, if it inspires you to socially intervene, what would you do to right such wrongs? So basically നിങ്ങളുടേതായ ഒരു പെർസ്പെക്റ്റീവ് ആണ് നമുക്ക് ഈ ആൻസറിൽ നമുക്ക് വരേണ്ടത്. So I repeat this question. If it inspires you to socially intervene, what would you do to right such wrongs? So basically we have to answer this question based on your point of view. So it's up to you. So we have 2 important questions that we have to answer. So basically we discussed regarding the major 2 questions from this classroom activity, and also the third one is for you. So you have to answer that question. So today we discussed regarding the first classroom activity and also the 2 important questions that we have to focus on, and the third one is for you. So today we discussed regarding the topics the hegemony, interpellation as well as this ideology, and also we go through the concept of this literature, the definition for the literature, and also regarding the concept of this literary test. And also today we focused on the first classroom activity, in which it is a paragraph from the God of Small Things by Arundhati Roy, and also go through some important questions from that. So in the following class we will be following these kinds of literary tests in order to get a clear idea regarding how to apply all these kinds of concept, the concept of the hegemony, the ideology, the interpellation, all these kinds of concept in the literary test. So that's for today. Thank you. Happy learning.